Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about backgrounds in comics, and I'm going to show you mistakes I have made and good things I've learned in my tenure as a comic creator. So something I see with novice comic creators, myself included, it goes one of two ways with backgrounds. People either do like too many really detailed backgrounds or not enough detailed backgrounds. It'll be a lot of blank space. These are both bad to an extent. Again, I think what makes it bad from like a novice standpoint is that the novice comic creator doesn't understand why they're doing this. They're either, again, I'm speaking for myself, either it was like I wasn't putting in backgrounds because I didn't know how to make them, or I was putting in way too much detail, way too many backgrounds because I was told, like, you need to start putting in backgrounds, honey. So I was overcorrecting and putting in way too much visual information. So for some examples of this, I'll grab one of our early comics, Sovereign. So here's an example of like no information backgrounds. Like these backgrounds are useless. So this was actually when I was partly into my overcorrecting phase, the first chapter of Sovereign. If you ever go look at it, like the backgrounds were basically just black. Like they had nothing going on. If anything was happening, it was just like blurry shapes. And so this is very similar, where I've got this dialogue scene. It's a back and forth mostly between Basil and Zoltar. Basil in the blue, Zoltar, this guy. Where they're mostly just talking back and forth. They're in the hallway of the ship, I believe. They're on a pirate ship, and I just needed this back and forth. For one, the composition of this page is terrible, and the backgrounds don't help. They're essentially blank backgrounds with some little shiplap boards that I scribbled in. But it's not giving any visual information. It's not really helping with the composition. The only one that basically helps is this one, just because I added a little bit of light that leads you down to this speech bubble. Like past Basil down to the speech bubble. That's the only helpful panel. The rest of them are just blank. Like this doesn't tell you anything. In fact, the background blends in with Zoltar's hair. Same with this one. The lighting, I guess it kind of brings you like horizontal towards the next panel, but not really. I guess this one kind of leads down. This one's bad because it leads you like off the page down here. It doesn't really help bring you from Basil to Zoltar to the wording. Yeah, and then this one you can't even see. So they're all kind of useless. Like this is a useless background. This tells nothing. It doesn't help the composition. And I guess like you can have backgrounds that are nothing, and I'll give you some good examples of kind of how to use that, where it's like maybe it's just a color, maybe it's just some like vague shapes, maybe you just use lighting. And the way you use that is for a few reasons. One can be to help with composition, like I said in that first panel. And sometimes a nothing background is used to just show emotion. So for example, in this scene, so this is from 9 Point, a more recent comic where I've got a better handle on when to use backgrounds or not. So this first page in the scene has a lot of backgrounds in it just because it's an establishing shot. So here we've got some background. We're setting up there in the nursery. We've got our king and queen here. Establishing shot, we need a big background. We need to see where the characters are. That's why it's more pulled out. You get a better sense of where they are, the environment, and where they are in relationship to each other, e.g. blocking. The blocking of the scene. That comes from theater. It's just a term of like where your actors are on the stage. I'll use it a lot in comics because it's just a good shorthand. Then for the next panel, I have a little bit of background. Again, this is just to keep him in the scene because we're still establishing, but it's not a lot of detail. It's mostly blank wall. We've got the door, just so you can say like, you've got a little visual marker, like, oh, here's the door, here's the door. We can tell where he is, but it's not overloading with visual information. Then again, we have another kind of establishing shot pulled away, showing her still in the chair. There's some little visual information, like where the other items are, but again, this is just because it's an establishing page. But then we go into the next page. We see the king approaching the crib. He has an emotional reaction, and then he's like, oh my god, it's happening. So when he's moving through the scene, going over to the crib. That's the purpose of this panel. So the background is very necessary because we have the crib in the foreground. We have some background elements just to show where everything is. We also have the queen in the foreground. The purpose of this panel is to show him walking over to the crib. So we need that background, foreground information. But then this is where no detailed background is a good idea. So these two panels, the purpose of them is just his emotional reaction. And I use the change of the background color. This is a stylistic choice. You don't have to use this at all. You could use the same background color if you're doing black and white. You know, you can use grayscale, black, white, whatever you have a purpose for. The style of 9-point, I do use these colored backgrounds to show emotional changes, but that's not necessary to backgrounds. But anyways, I'm getting off point. The purpose of these panels is his emotional reaction change. So I use the blank background for one. His face is taking up the majority of the panels. Like, there is no room for a background, and there's no purpose to putting a detailed environment in the background here. You wouldn't see it very well. It doesn't add to the emotion of the panel. The purpose is just to show his expression change. So I use the color, I use a blank space behind him. It suits the purpose of the panels. And then we get more background because, again, he's moving. There's been like a change in action. So I need to show the environment to say, like, things are changing, things are moving. You need to see the background to understand the blocking of the characters, to understand like the movement and the purpose of this panel, which is him picking up the baby and running over to his wife. And again, we'll go to the last page of the scene, where again we have movement of the characters. So we need to see she's gotten up from her chair. We can see the windows in the background to give like that visual indication of like where they are in the room. He hasn't moved very far. He's still standing behind the crib, but we're showing the queen and her movement here. So we show more of the background. Then we're getting an emotional close-up. So again, the focus of this panel is their expressions as they look down at the baby. And I went for, instead of just using like a blank color for the background, for this I wanted to show kind of, again, that heightening of their emotions, where their focus is going down on the baby. And the emotion right now is that like their fear is rising. They're having this terrible realization. So I wanted to show these windows in the background. You can see the little implications of the archways of the windows here. I wanted to have them kind of like fading away and getting darker as this like bad realization hits them, like the rest of the world goes out of focus. So that's where just the implication of something in the background really works. And I'm using a change of color to heighten the emotion. That's a stylistic choice of mine. And then for the last panel, we don't need a detailed background. Our focus is on the baby's face. The realization that her eyes are blue. There's like lore reasons why this is bad. Where our whole focus is on the baby, so we don't really need to see any of the background. And again, the same reason with the close-ups on the king's face. There's not a lot of room to put visual information in here. It's not necessary, so I just use a color. In this case, I just continued like the darkened shapes from the last one to here, and just put the focus on the character. So yeah, essentially I just grabbed a bunch of examples here. Here's a similar thing that I did in the Magpie. This came before the 9-point pages, so they're a little less refined, I think, but I think they're still like a passing grade when it comes to backgrounds. So this is the beginning of a scene. They're just coming out of the school. They were in a hallway in the last scene. So Trixie, the blonde girl, she's coming out. We're establishing she's stepping out of the door. Amanda's sitting here by the side of the school. We're just setting up the environment, though the environment isn't very detailed in this case. And again, because we're establishing the scene, there's a lot of background indicators within these, even though like they're not very detailed, especially in the second two panels where we just need to show, for example, this panel is just showing Amanda's emotion. So the focus is mostly on her. The background's not very detailed. It doesn't really matter what's going on in the background here. We're mostly just showing her stance and emotion. And then same here, we're just showing Trixie joining her at the wall. We don't need a lot of detail in the background. We're just showing where the characters are in relationship to each other and their emotions. So then for this page, Again, this is a stylistic thing that I chose for the Magpie. This was originally a black and white comic that we then added color to, but so for a lot of the backgrounds where I don't need a lot of information, I'm just focusing on the character's emotions, e.g. here, we're just focused on Amanda talking, we're focused on the dialogue. I will just use like a black fill background or a white fill background, though in the colored version, sometimes they'll be colored in if it was like a white background originally. But again, that was a stylistic choice. That's something I like to do. But again, you can use like whatever is necessary for the background. But for this panel, they're just talking. We're focused on emotions. We're focused on dialogue. I don't need to put a lot of visual information into the background. So then for this first panel here, I did include the background because we're showing like the change of their stances. So we're seeing Trixie kind of like reach over, put her hand on her shoulder, Amanda slumping down. I wanted to include the background just to have focus on it. Also, if you took away the background, it would be a lot of blank space. And for the balance of the page, I needed them to be a little bit smaller. So adding the background in does help balance out this panel, even though they're not moving a whole lot. You don't really need to reestablish the background. And then for this last panel, when there is a big movement change, we see Amanda sit all the way down. You know, I pulled out quite a bit, showed more visual information to really show her moving, because if this was a blank background, it would be confusing. So that's definitely something to consider. When there's like big movements from characters, including the background will help your reader understand where they are. And then again here, there's a page missing here, so they're in the previous page, which I didn't include because I didn't think it was necessary. We do see Trixie also sit down. But here I've just included the background to show her in the new spot. This one doesn't need a whole lot of background information. This is one I'd call like kind of an abstracted out background. It does show the brick wall, but the focus isn't really on that. The focus is on the characters. They take up most of the composition. The background here is just like, I didn't want two panels next to each other where we have no background here because we're really focused on like the emotion and Amanda. So I was like, I'll include the background here, just so it's not repetitive, but we don't need a lot of environmental information. And then we pull out, we get environmental information again, because there's been a big movement. Amanda is standing up. And so backgrounds, as you can kind of tell from my examples with like the Magpie and with 9-point, backgrounds kind of work together as a whole. You can look at backgrounds kind of like panel by panel, as I have been, but they also work together in a scene. So like the visual information that's happening here with like Trixie coming out, them standing in front of the wall, being able to pull out and show like where they are in relation to this wall, but also being able to like close in and get rid of background information. Like it all builds together to help the reader understand the scene, to understand what's happening, to understand like the emotion that's going on. They work together as a whole. And sometimes you can get kind of lost in working on one specific panel, where you do kind of need to consider every panel and every page and how many backgrounds you're showing, how many you're not showing, to help with like making that scene work. Does that make sense? It all comes together. Yeah, and I just threw in some more pages just to kind of help understand how things go. So like here is a page, again this is from 9-point, where a lot of backgrounds make sense because they're doing a lot of movement. We have Ember, this raccoon, Marble, his cat son, who thinks he is a raccoon. Don't tell him. Okay. They are climbing up a tree, so we need this visual information. We need this background. It's essentially an establishing shot. It's a big movement shot where they're climbing this tree. We have a reverse shot where we see, we're going from looking up to then looking down because we need to see Marble's face. And we need that visual information to understand where he is. For one, it does help compositionally to just like point the lines down at his face. It brings you like through the speech bubble to his face and then down to the next panel. But having this visual information, because they're in such like a weird position, like they're climbing a tree, these background pieces do really help understand where the characters are so that they don't just like teleport to the top of the tree kind of thing. We can tell, because we've seen Ember moving up, we can see him here above Marble, that it makes sense in the next panel that he's gotten to the top of the tree. Your backgrounds can really help understand the movement of characters from panel to panel and page to page. And then for this last one, where he's just reaching down to grab Marble's hand, we didn't need a background for that. We understand who's in the scene and what they're doing. And there are also places, so that was a page that had like a lot of background information because it was necessary. Here's a page where like you don't need a lot of background information. This is an explainer page from 9 Point. A character's kind of giving a lecture about how some of the different magic works. So these are very representational panels. The focus here is just on like the souls, the magic powers that the Lynx Point cat has. So like if I put in a detailed background here, like it would just be distracting. There would be no purpose to it. The whole purpose is just to show the cat and the powers and this arrow going through. So I just use some representational shapes, some dark colors so that the light colors would stand out on top. So there are places where you can have really abstracted out backgrounds and you can have a lot of them. And again, it just comes down to like the purpose of the page and the panel. I feel like I've shown some decent examples of blocking. Here's one that was weird. Again, it's from Sovereign, so this is like our first comic ever. So there were a lot of bad choices. It had a lot of weird backgrounds. This first page, so this is an establishing shot. Where we're in Raelle, the Pirate Queen. We're in her office with Basil. This one gets like a passing grade, I think. This is like a decent opening shot from this era of my work, where like we have some recognizable landmarks within the room. So we have this big window. We have a map over here on the, I guess, right wall. If we're using Basil's point of view. And we see these little landmarks to show where they are. So we always see like the window is behind Raelle. We see that the map is here. We get a reverse shot of Raelle, so we see that there's a door here. We see that there's like a coat rack here. And one thing I did that I don't like, and you'll see in the next page, is I added maps on the left wall as well. It's on the right here, but you know, it's like Basil's left. So there's maps here, and they're not very distinct from this map. So this page, on an island of its own, works decently well. I can tell where they are. It's an establishing shot, so I need that visual background information of like where they are in the room. But as soon as I go to the next page in this scene, it's kind of confusing. So the first two panels, they're fine. We've got the landmark of the window behind Raelle. That is fine. We see a little bit of the map here. But then, when we're looking at the left side of the room, from Basil's perspective, we see these maps that are not distinct from this map that is on the opposite wall. And so it's very confusing. They're not really necessary. Honestly, I should have kept this wall blank because it would have helped understand kind of where we're looking at the characters, where they're standing. This is confusing. It makes things feel like they've flipped around for no good reason. I should have just kept the one map as a landmark. So yeah, be careful what you're putting in your backgrounds in your rooms. And I think the last example I'll show are from Pretty Mouth. So again, this is an early comic in my career, not the best. Here's another example of like a really confusing background. Again, this was the era where I was afraid of like putting no detail into a background because I was told like you need to add background. So I was like, okay, every panel gets a background. But I did not have the skill to draw backgrounds. I'm glad I put them in because I got better the more I put them in. Unfortunately, that's just like a weird growing pain that you're going to have to go through with making your comics. I guess the only way to remedy it is to practice lots outside of your actual comic page. Like just do lots of background study. But here's a scene that is so confusing. There are no... I tried to put in some visual landmarks, as it were, but they're very confusing. It doesn't help that I had like a very messy visual style where everything was very sketched out in the background. But like the visual marks are like there's a window that's supposed to be at the front of the store, but because like there hasn't been a good establishing shot, like I don't know where the heck these guys are. So we've got these windows here, and the characters are moving around, so they're just kind of floating around these windows. Where like Evan's here. Alicia, is that her name? It's been a while since I've read this comic. But his friend is here. Right, so he, at some point between these panels, takes off his hat and goes to this side and she goes to this side. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, I didn't visually mark the changes going on. And then suddenly, they're behind cash registers. And we suddenly see the opposite side. So the window is here. This is supposed to be the opposite side of the store where we see shelves. There's this guy who's like way too high up in the air because I didn't understand where to place people on the floor. So it looks like he's just like floating through the background. And then we've still got these shelves, but then suddenly this case has appeared. Which I think is part of the cash register, but it wasn't there before. And I mean, I guess I did put in this like save poster. It was on the previous page, so it also appears here, so that's kind of helpful. And I guess I've got these little like cash register screens that keep showing up as like a little visual landmark, but like there's just so much happening that it's really confusing. This has moved. It's suddenly like way farther over here. So like this is just a mess. I'm very confused by what I was doing here. I didn't know what I was doing. We've got a bulletin board. When did that show up? The shelves have moved. A lot of this is just because I didn't quite understand perspective. Things were just kind of moving around willy-nilly. It's very confusing. So be careful when you're putting in detailed backgrounds. They can be so useful for understanding where your characters are in space, but you need to be consistent and thoughtful about what you're including and where you're putting it. Because otherwise it just feels like characters are floating around and it's really confusing. I did want to show one nice example of a background where even though I did have this messy, sketchy style, I think these pages, again, from Pretty Mouth were a lot more thought out. And I used some, again, visual landmarks to really help anchor where things are. So the big landmark here would be this bus station. So there's this glass bus station that Silver is standing beside. And it helps that she's the only character here. She stands out quite a bit against the background. And so we can keep seeing this glass bus shelter behind her. So we know where she is in relation to it. In this establishing shot, she's standing beside it. We get a close-up. We still see it. We're like, okay, she's still standing there. We see her pace back and forth in front of it. We have not gone very far in the background. Again, I think the sketchy stuff in the background, like I've got all these trees and things, it has helped that we have since added color. This first came out in black and white. But the bus shelter, the ground, the sidewalk, the trees, they're all very simple. They're kept in place, and she's really the only thing that's moving around. So it's easy to follow where she is. And then in the next page, where she starts wandering into the trees, we use the bus shelter as, again, an anchor to show how far she's moved. So she looks back, she sees something in the trees, she turns around, we see the bus shelter, we know that she's still beside it, but she's looking back. We get a little close-up here. I'm proud of me. I didn't put in a background, I just put in a little color because we're just focused on her face. Good job, young Ursula. And then the next scene where she has moved quite a bit, we see the glass bus shelter as an anchor point, so we can see, she's moved into the trees. She's moved far away from this anchor point. We understand where she is in visual space. So there you go. Even in my younger days where I wasn't great at it, here is an example of using landmarks to kind of anchor things. And that's it. I grabbed some other examples of like some okay backgrounds, but I don't think it's really necessary. So that's it. That's my review of myself. Young Ursula was silly, but sometimes she got it right. And hopefully that helps you with understanding backgrounds. Again, it really depends on what you need out of a scene, what you need out of a page. I said it a lot, but establishing shots. So like when you first enter a scene, you do kind of want to show where your characters are in the environment, just to help with understanding. You definitely want to show environments when characters are moving around so that the reader can tell where they are. They can tell how much a character has moved, maybe how much time has passed. Whereas like when you really need to like pull in and show emotion or focus on like a key object or a key character, you don't need all that background information. And I guess there's no right answer. It really depends on what your particular page or panel needs, but hopefully these are some good guidelines on how to choose what to do for your backgrounds. And like I said, they'll get better with practice. I struggled for a long time with perspective and clarity and like where to place things, and really just practicing kind of got me to where my backgrounds are intelligible. So just keep practicing. You got this. That's it. I don't know how to end this. Goodbye.